Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might be. My name is Gaddi Vasquez, and I am the chair of the advisory board of the Aspen Institute Latinos and Society program. On behalf of our program, I would like to welcome you to today's Aspen City Action Lab masterclass on big money, the role of institutional capital in supporting prosperity for Latino communities. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I want to go over some housekeeping notes. This webinar will be from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It will be recorded, and we will send the link to the video next week. We want this webinar to be engaging. Please use a Q&A box to submit your questions, as they will be answered right after the panel discussion. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Aspen Institute Latinos and Society program is one of 45 policy programs at the Aspen Institute. Our work focuses on empowering and promoting long-term economic growth and resiliency in Latino communities throughout the United States. We focus on Latino entrepreneurship, workforce development, strategies through digital success, and leadership development. The masterclass is a series of capacity building webinars with the goal of equipping local leaders with the knowledge to build wealth in their communities. Today's masterclass is focused on institutional capital. For those not familiar with this term, institutional capital refers to the large pools of investment capital managed by institutions such as pension funds. In this webinar, we will focus on capital or on the capital invested in real estate. We designed this masterclass because institutional capital is what powers investments in local projects. However, our communities don't often understand how much capital is in play or how investment decisions are made. Through this session, our panelists will give attendees a macro perspective and introduction to institutional capital and discuss how these investments are connected to community wealth building. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Ivan Barron, Executive Director of the Pension Real Estate Association Foundation, or PREA Foundation for short. Dr. Barron began his career in real estate in the real estate industry as Deputy Director of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, an organization that I am well familiar with, having been associated with NAREP at its inception. Prior to his appointment as Executive Director at the PREA Foundation, he was at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Dr. Barron has spent his career working to expand economic and educational opportunities for people from all backgrounds. He has launched nationally recognized diversity and inclusion programs in partnership with leading corporations, universities, and foundations. He has been a major contributor to our community and its development. Please join me in not only welcome Dr. Barron, but also thanking him for working with our team to design this session. Dr. Barron.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. It's great to be here with you all. Excited to be joining here for this masterclass session. We have some great panelists for you all today. And so I'm going to take a few minutes just to set up the conversation and speak a little bit about institutional capital, provide some parameters, and then we'll dig right in and get our panelists speaking with you all on this topic. So I have been the executive director at the Pension Real Estate Association Foundation for the last 2.5 years. As the ambassador introduced me, I've been involved in philanthropy in years past, but originally, I have humble roots. I was born in Mexico City, and I immigrated to the United States at the age of 9. Definitely a very humbling time for me and my family to grow up that way. And it was really interesting to see for me as a young person when my parents were finally able to buy a house in our community. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. They were able to finally afford a house. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, about 900 square feet, but there were 5 of us. But for them, it was a real life-changing experience. And most of us know and understand that real estate is a really powerful tool in community building and in wealth building. So we're going to talk about real estate, but we're going to talk about the very large side of real estate investment, which is institutional capital. So let me provide a little bit of introduction on the topic. All right. all of us in some way or another are involved in real estate. Either we are tenants or landlords, investors or developers. So all of us have a connection and understanding of real estate in general. And here we're going to talk about a different type of real estate market or subsegment, which is institutional real estate. All right. The Pension Real Estate Association, which is a trade association focused on institutional investors. There's basically about 750 corporate member firms representing 17 different countries. Members here include some very large corporations you're all very familiar with, such as JP Morgan Chase and Blackstone and Goldman Sachs, which provide investment services. And then there is the investors that are the pension real estate members, which represent capital in pension funds, foundations, sovereign wealth funds. These entities basically have under management over $11 trillion in assets. So I want to let that sink in for a minute. About $11 trillion in assets, and approximately 800 billion of them invested just in real estate alone. So we're talking about an enormous pool of capital that is being allocated on projects. One of the things I will say is, unfortunately, as in other industries, representation of women and people of color in institutional real estate is also lagging behind. A recent study by the Knight Foundation showed that in the real estate industry, only about 2.7% of assets under management are controlled by women or minority-owned investment firms. Recognizing the importance of having better representation in the allocation of assets that impact people all over the world, the PREA Association established the PREA Foundation, which I run, back in 2017 with a mandate to advance diversity and inclusion in the institutional real estate industry. So I've been, as I said, with the foundation about 2.5 years. And that time I've worked to double our grant making and more than triple the number of individuals who serve through our programs each year. We basically are focused on increasing the number of women and young people entering institutional real estate in careers so that one day they will be leading and having more influence over the allocation of these funds. So that is a setup to help you understand the industry as a whole. Again, it's complex and there's many different players. And today you're going to meet panelists who are going to talk about their respective roles in the industry. So if I could have our panelists come on video here, and I will go ahead and get us going on the conversation. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves first, give you just a quick synopsis on the organization they're a part of, and perhaps the size of either assets under management or the size of the investment portfolios that they are in charge of. Also, I'd like to ask, if possible, if this is relevant, if any of the projects that your organizations are involved with are in any of the Action Lab cities. These are Chicago, El Paso, Miami, Philadelphia, Phoenix, San Antonio, and San Bernardino. So if you do know that, and you know any major projects that are going on, if you could bring that up as well. I will go ahead and start and have Carolyn introduce herself, and then I'll call on the other panelists. So Carolyn, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Carolyn Inoa Monge. I work for Nuveen Real Estate, which is the real estate asset management arm of TIAA. By way of background, I was born in the Dominican Republic, raised in the Bronx from the time that I was 5. Was a beneficiary of a lot of the programs that are available to young kids growing up in New York, and was able to sort of really take advantage of those, and went to one of the top private schools in New York for high school on full scholarship. I actually grew up in Section 8 housing in New York the entire time that we were there in the Bronx. And, from there, I went to Harvard University on a full scholarship as well. And I had the benefit of working for an investment bank during my internships in college, but really wasn't very good at networking and didn't feel I had a lot in common with the people that I was working with. I couldn't figure out sort of how to establish those connections. And so even though I was introduced to some of the real estate divisions while I was there, I really wasn't able to network my way into those divisions, even though that's where I wanted to work. So I actually ended up pivoting to try to develop my sort of relationship building skills through a career in sales, working in the healthcare industry. And I worked in healthcare sales and consulting for 5 years before going to business school at University of Chicago to finally make my way into the real estate industry. And so I'm here now. I've been full-time in the real estate industry since graduating University of Chicago in 2013. And I am currently the deputy portfolio manager for the largest real estate fund that Nuveen Real Estate manages, which is called the TIA Real Estate Fund. It's a $30 billion fund, very unique in nature in that we manage people's individual retirement capital. So you've got your doctors, your teachers, your nurses that are literally going into their retirement accounts and deciding to allocate a portion of their retirement account into our fund. And so we manage that capital to try to maximize returns for those folks' retirement. And by way of sort of example of where some of our holdings exist in sort of your neck of the woods, we have a retail center, for example, in the outskirts of Chicago called Village Crossing. It's been very successful for us. We also own the Michael Jordan store at 32 South State Street in Chicago. In Miami, Florida, we own 701 Brickell, which is a trophy office asset in the Brickell neighborhood. And we also own the Miami International Mall in partnership with Simon Properties. And lastly, I'll mention we actually own a lot of industrial property in San Bernardino, California, which is tenanted by a lot of third-party logistics firms that are responsible for sort of processing and shipping all of the goods that the people in the community demand. So I'll leave it at that and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Let's have Manny, if you could introduce yourself.
Excuse me. Hello, everyone. Manny Casanga. I am the Director of Real Estate and Real Assets at the New York State Common Retirement Fund. It is the third largest pension fund in the U.S. I've been there, how many years? 27 years, working on different things, and elevated to the Director of Real Estate in 2015, and then took over the real assets portfolio, which consists of infrastructure in 2018. And today we have probably about 34 billion of assets under management between both teams, with the majority in real estate, as that is the asset class that we've been investing for a long time. Regards to my background, grew up right across the river from Carolyn, probably not in the same time frame, but I grew up in Washington Heights, up in northern Manhattan. Child of immigrants, came here. Hardworking parents. Had to join the Army to help pay for school, and thought that I was just going to do that for a few years, and stayed in the National Guard and did 27 years and kind of moonlighted between two careers, and never thought that I would spend so much time in the military, but it actually grounded me in who I am and how I am as a person, and how I do and how I lead and mentor my team. But I'm looking forward to the discussion today in regards to the cities, Chicago, Miami, Philly. We have some retail there with our partner, Chicago specifically, the Fulton Market, Miami, Sunset Harbor, Philadelphia, Greenhouse Square, Phoenix, we have some multifamily. San Antonio, we don't have anything, and just like Carolyn, San Bernardino, we have a lot of industrial. So looking forward to the conversation.
That's great. And last but certainly not least, Brian.
Hi, everyone. Brian Sanchez. I am the CEO of Limestone Investments, which is a real estate manager. We're based in Houston, Texas. We're about 21 years old. We manage about 10 billion of assets, primarily for big state pension funds, not Manny's, but some other very large state pension funds. And our specialty, it has been, particularly over the last decade, either investing in high quality mixed use projects or actually financing the development of these projects. In particular, in regions of the United States that are really seeing outsized economic growth. Some of those places are probably obvious to many of you: Austin, Texas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Denver, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, Seattle is one of our key target markets. And what we have found, we've been real urban specialists for our entire history, and have really sort of benefited from the or taken advantage of the re-urbanization of a lot of American cities. Most cities don't look like New York City. Most cities experienced a lot of their growth and development after World War II, and were based on a development pattern that frankly isn't really well suited for the world we live in today. And so we have been taking advantage of that and investing in the projects that make cities like Atlanta or Dallas or Denver better, more mixed use, multimodal transportation options, the ability for people to live, frankly, more sustainable lives. And so that's our specialty. We also are heavy users of analytics to make our investment decisions, our site locations, both at a micro and macro level. I'm happy to talk about that, but that's something we've been leaders in since the beginning. By personal background, I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. My family has been in the New Mexico region for literally hundreds of years. The border crossed us in 1848, and my family mostly was farming on the banks of the Rio Grande until about World War II. And so I have very deep roots in that state. I left to go to college. I went to Georgetown, had the privilege of going to Georgetown in DC, which really changed the trajectory of my life, gave me a whole different set of options professionally that have really been wonderful. And then I ended up at Harvard Business School, and I've been with Limestone principally since I graduated 20 years ago from Harvard Business School. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Yvonne.
Great, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and help us situate the space. As I said, everybody has some sort of connection and affiliation to real estate at some level, but institutional capital, and again, I'm fairly new to the industry, and I'm learning that there's levels upon levels of individuals involved. Maybe I'll just start with you, Brian. If you could help just all kind of get a sense for who are the basic players that are involved in institutional capital making an actual investment. Just help us sort of level set.
Yeah, so let's just assume, let's take one potential building. Let's just say it's a downtown office building in any one of your cities that you're sitting in today. More likely than not, the owner is an institutional owner. It's probably got some form of debt on it that comes from, a major bank or an insurance company. And the equity capital could be, a pension fund like Manny's, managed by a group like mine. And then we further would go out and hire property managers who, make sure the doors are open every morning and that the lobby is clean and that the tenants are taken care of. And so there's this whole ecosystem that makes the cities run, but it really starts with ultimately the equity capital, which is more often than not a pension fund. It could be something like Carolyn's retirement funds for teachers and doctors, or it could be a sovereign wealth fund. There's several very large sovereign wealth funds like the GIC in Singapore or Norges Bank in Norway that have just massive amounts of capital and really like to place capital in the United States because of its economic vitality and safety.
Okay, that's super helpful. So again, multiple layers, multiple stakeholders involved in this process. Let's specifically talk about the equity capital. And so let me turn it now over to Manny and Carolyn. I would love to, both of you could comment on the sizes and the parameters for the types of investments that you are all involved in. What are some of the key and also the key decision criteria for an investment that you want to make? What kind of deals are you guys, again, what are those parameters for these types of deals that you're all looking at?
Tom, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, I'll speak specifically to my fund. Every fund is a little bit different, but so as I mentioned, we're a $30 billion fund, which is really sizable. And so in order to move the needle, we really look for deals that allow us to put at least, call it $40 to $50 million of equity capital to work. Because if we look for deals that are much smaller than that, it just doesn't have the economies of scale in order for us to actually be efficient. And then we are a diversified fund, so we can invest in almost anything, apartments, industrial, retail, storage, student housing, you name it. What we look for is diversification. So we look across our portfolio and we see kind of where the gaps are, where, what portions of our portfolio have performed better, where we have the highest conviction. So for example, depending on your knowledge of the commercial real estate market, may not be news to you that, for example, we are looking to reduce our exposure to traditional office buildings and increase our exposure to things like, apartments, industrial, self-storage, that have, and even a little bit of life science, even though the demand there has sort of waned a little bit as of late. Things that we have sort of higher conviction in, that we feel are a little bit more recession resilient, that will stand the test of time, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. And so we're constantly evaluating our portfolio and the makeup of our portfolio to then determine where we want to put the next dollar. And then just to kind of try to make this a little bit more relevant for the specific audience. So one of the things that I have sort of championed for my fund is the ability to invest in affordable housing. So our fund is highly regulated because it's technically a retirement product. And so we have to abide by the parameters of our public documents. And up until last year, our public documents did not specifically state that affordable housing was an area of real estate in which we could invest. It was sort of left unsaid. And so in order to make sure that we abide by our documents, we had to go through the legal process of amending them in order to make sure that we could do that. So, starting next year, we will be able to invest in affordable housing, for example, which is a category that I'm really excited about, especially since I grew up in affordable housing. And I think I have sort of an understanding of the value associated with doing so. Does that sort of help answer the question, or did you want me to take it in a different direction, Ivan?
No, that's helpful. That's a great start. I may circle back on the affordable housing stuff in a minute. I want to just ask Manny again to talk a little bit about the parameters and the investments that you're looking at, and again, kind of how, what criteria, what are the top criteria for deciding what kind of projects to invest in.
Sure. Just to start at a high level, right? It starts off with what we call an asset allocation plan as to, how we invest the fund. So we make sure that we meet the benefits of our, our constituency. And that leads into a patient study, or more or less dictates how much capital we commit in any particular year. And, looking back the last few years, that could be anywhere from $2.5 billion to $4 billion a year. So when you take that size, just even at the low end, $2.5 billion a year, that's a lot of capital that either has to be committed or invested directly in investments. So typically, when we invest in commingled funds, where we give up discretion, kind of what Brian does at Limestone, we could typically write a check anywhere from as low as 200 million to, we've written checks up to 800 million. But we tend not to write those type of checks anymore. We just kind of keep them more in that $200 to $400 million bite size. And then we have the non-discretion side of our program where we invest through JVs or we invest ourselves directly and into specific assets. So that could be anywhere from 50 million to 100 million. With that said, we've recognized that there is a segment of the market that is smaller, that is inefficient for us to invest in. And as such, we implemented an emerging manager program that focuses on kind of that lower to middle market opportunities. And over the last 10 years, we've committed about 1.8 billion to emerging managers. Definition is broad, right? When you think about, just first, second, or third time fund, no more than 2 billion in AUM raised. But, want to say that we have been very successful in targeting the women and the minority aspect in that program, where we say roughly 65 to 70%, 75% of those commitments have gone to minorities and women. And the best part is if they do good, we do good. And, we paid over $100 million in promotes to these managers. So the program has been very successful. And I know we'll talk about it, but that's how we access, that's our connection to the minorities and, to these locations, is by investing with these managers that are inefficient for us to invest in directly.
Yep, that's very, very helpful. And you touched on it. So we're talking very large sums of capital from everything that I'm hearing from both of you, particularly with your funds, 40 to 50 million minimum, or 200 to 400 million minimum. So again, even for you to look at certain projects, it requires a significant scale, a project of significant size, right? Manny, you mentioned that one potential way to sort of expand that is this, emerging manager programs, where you actually have women and some minority, basically firms that bring potentially different size projects or investing in different things. I'll ask you, any of you can comment on this. Do you see a difference in the types of projects that are brought in by women or minority-owned firms that may involve, again, some regions of the country that might be overlooked by just some of the traditional criteria? Have you guys noticed anything different in this? And if so, what that might be?
I don't want to say that we've been targeted. It's more or less finding the manager that can execute, that can execute for us, right? Because I think if we target specific markets or, locations, it makes it that much harder. So we, at first, we kind of paint that broad try to get that broad canvas as to the managers that we can find. And then, that's how we evaluate them. And then, we want to understand what's their expertise, right, in that particular market, right? And, a lot of times, what my experience has been, it's always been kind of the movers and shakers, the broker, the leasing agent, right, that knows everybody and everybody knows them, and that gives them that access to that deal floor. But we've never targeted a specific location. It's just more of finding that manager, getting comfortable with that manager, and letting them go and execute for us.
Okay, that's helpful.
Ivan, I can actually, I think, piggyback on Manny's answer, because Manny and I actually have a little bit of history. I actually used to help manage the emerging manager program that Manny runs through when I used to work at Artemis Real Estate Partners. And my primary job was actually to screen and underwrite women and minority-owned firms for access to the capital that Manny provides. And through my time there, I screened 80 to 90 firms. And I did find that because of the unique nature of the capital and the fact that we were actively providing this capital, or trying to provide this capital to women and minority-owned firms, it was more likely that I would run into firms that had a strategy that in one way or another did touch communities of color. For example, I did screen a manager that invested in apartments, but actively targeted Latino communities with the thought that, and the thesis that Latinos tend to be very sticky tenants and they tend to really take pride in where they live, and also if you provide amenities specific to their interests. So for example, replacing the tennis court with a soccer field, it increases that stickiness, increases their pride in their community, reduces the amount of wear and tear because of the fact that they're taking pride in where they live. And so that was sort of part of their whole thesis, and part of sort of their way of driving returns. So I thought that was really interesting. And just one other example was a manager that focused on retail, but in investing in ethnic grocer anchored retail centers. So, Latino grocers, or like Korean grocers, like an H Mart, things like that. So I did find that by opening this avenue to women and minority owned firms, you're more likely to access some of these unique strategies that are actually pretty applicable to the minority community.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So we're talking about managers, some of these emerging managers or women minority owned firms that can potentially bring or invest in different types of things that do involve potentially Latino community. Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything from your perspective in working in the Southwest or anywhere else, where you've seen that there are opportunities or things have come up where projects do involve, projects in Latino, heavily Latino communities.
Well, I'll say two things. One is I want to just say how important these emerging manager programs are, and most of the big pension funds have them. I think it sort of wanes, ebbs and flows as to how committed people are to the programs, but they're really important. And I say it because, and Yvonne, everyone on this call can attest to this, there aren't many people who look like us who are managing capital in this business. It is a very non-diverse business. It sort of skews old, it skews male, it skews white. And so, it's a big deal. As we've pointed out, there's a lot of capital at stake here, serving millions and millions of people, whether they're the retirees under Mandy's program or Carolyn's, so all I can say is those programs are really important. If I go back in time, both Carolyn and I have sort of grown up in other businesses we didn't found. I think it would have been impossible for me 20 years ago to figure out how to do this on my own. And so these are important things. As I think about like, where do we invest and how can you continue to invest in, our communities? I do think about, the other side of it, where development is a big way to generate solid returns, and the development community, I'd love to find more Latino developers, but they don't exist. It's like so rare. It's another area that, I think we've got some investment manager programs that are getting better, but in the development side of the business, it's even less diverse, and that's where a lot of value is created over time. So we've got work to do, it's one of the reasons why my firm and others have been so supportive of Yvonne's work, because we need to build the pipeline. We need to build the talent within our existing businesses, so that the business of managing capital in the built environment in real estate looks more like everyone who lives in this country now. It's a very diverse country. We should all look similar, but we've got a long way to go. Long way to go.
Well, let me ask the three of you here. So what's to stop, and I'm going to ask this question this way, and then I'll clarify it. What's to stop any of the three of you from going to your clients or investment committees and saying, listen, we got these great cities, the Aspen Latino cities that are identified here with great, growing Hispanic populations or great centers. We should be investing more of our dollars in these communities, because not only are they going to lead to great returns, but also to support wealth building in these communities. What are some of the underlying sort of, I guess I should say, like the interest, the restraints of you being able to just purely go up there and advocate for projects in these communities? What sort of, challenges emerge that don't allow you just to advocate for that in the way that I just described. I'll take, any of you can chime in.
I'm happy to start. I would say, look, we have to, as a manager, we have to generate good returns. That is the most important thing. You know, I think there are lots of people who would love for us to generate great returns and also, you know, invest in some of these, you know, some of our communities. And if we can get both of those, great. But at the end of the day, you know, for us to survive and for Manny to do his job and what he does, we have to generate, you know, what we set out to do. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you can sort of get a double win where you're both investing in a community and making it better and generate a good return. But you've got to have both. You cannot not have the returns. And so, you know, the one thing that we spend so much time at Limestone figuring out is what cities are thriving in the United States. And the reality, whether we want to accept it or not, is some places are thriving and growing and other places might be stagnant and other places are probably falling behind. And I say that with I say that with disappointment, but that is the reality of where we are economically. And so, you know, Austin, Texas is hitting on all cylinders. Okay. And so we know if we're really smart about what we can do, we can probably make outsized returns there. At least we have been for the last decade. You know, I'm sure we're serving a city that's 40% Latino. Austin has got a strong Latino population, but it's a little more indirect. But you know, they're profiting. I think that community is getting stronger, and hopefully we're a part of that as well.
Okay, Manny, Carolyn, love to get your take on that question as well.
Sorry. No, Brian, you know, said it correctly, right? We're return driven, and it's not because we want to, it's because we need to. You know, we have, you know, millions of beneficiaries that we need that are counting on us for that retirement check. So we have a, you know, rate of return that we need to ensure that, you know, we hit from year to year. And, you know, we hire people like, you know, the likes of Limestone to do that for us, right? And if they can't, you know, hit those targets, right, then they're not going to be in business either, right? So it's, you know, do we want to do the right thing socially? Yes. Do we look at investments? We do, but they're hard to pencil out. You know, we focus a lot on affordable housing, but without there being some incentives, it's really hard to make the numbers work without getting to the returns you want. But with that said, you know, we have other initiatives that we do to make sure that, you know, where we have our projects, that we're targeting the right people that look like us, right? It's through the contracting, right? You know, we collect numbers at the property levels as to, you know, who's getting what or who's getting what type of contracts, and we monitor that. We publish that actually in a report as to, you know, how much capital goes in regards to services to minority and women. So we may not be doing something directly, but indirectly, we're making sure that there is a generation of wealth, right, through contracted services.
Very, very helpful.
I'll
Carol,
go ahead.
jump in. Yeah.
Yep. I'll sort of answer the question from a little bit of a different angle. So for us, it's, I think, a matter of specialization. So, you know, at Nubian Real Estate, actually, about 5 years ago, we transformed our business and went to the sector specialist model. So all of our acquisitions professionals and asset management professionals, they specialize in either apartments, retail, industrial, or another sector, right? And in a sense, if you think about it, just based on the conversation that we've been having in terms of the demographics inside of the investment management and investor communities, right? The prevalence of people that look like us is low. And so as a result, there's, I think, a lack of general understanding for the value that can be generated by investing in communities of color, Latino communities. And so whether it be a lack of understanding for the specific submarket or geography, or just the demand generators or whatever you might have. So, you know, you get a person like me coming to Nuveen, knocking on the door of our acquisitions professionals and saying like, why don't you show me some ethnic grocer deals? And they're getting uncomfortable. they've never had to look at those.
Yeah.
And it's not their specialty. And so I think that, you know, the more we address the problem of diversity within our own firms, within the asset management industry, within the investor community, the more those hurdles go away. Now, the good thing for us is that from a specialization standpoint, we actually did, as of last year, stand up our impact sector.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that investing in communities of color should necessarily entirely fall under the umbrella of impact, because I think you don't have to be an impact fund to make money investing in those communities. But that said, because now we have this sector, we have a set of specialists that understand affordable housing and that have roots and understanding in submarkets that do happen to be heavily populated by Latinos and other people of color. And so as a result, we have literally a little army of people that can truly impart the value of these investments in a very strong way to our investment committee, which is ultimately the committee that approves any investment that we make. And so that, I think, opens the door for other funds inside of our company to be able to look at these deals with conviction and say, hey, like these guys, they know what they're doing. Look at the returns that they're generating, investing in these communities. This may not be something that we traditionally have invested in, but I think the returns speak for themselves, because ultimately, like Manny and Brian just said, we are fiduciaries first and foremost. We have to generate strong returns for our investors no matter what. And so as long as we can get comfortable that we're going to be able to generate those returns, of course, we're going to start investing in those projects and in those communities. But I think that, you know, those hurdles still exist, you know, across our industry. And so that's one of the ways in which we're addressing it inside of my firm directly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're going to open it up to Q&A here in just a minute. I do want to bring one last point up is so that related to impact investing or ESG criteria. We have been seeing in the media, you know, different state legislatures and others introducing laws, particularly for pension funds and others, preventing literally the use of certain criteria. Certain states are sort of making it much more difficult to even consider speaking about, you know, environmental, social, or governance related goals when they're speaking about, you know, criteria for investment. Are you guys starting to see that? I mean, how are you guys starting to see that become potentially more problematic and even getting a chance to bring any other criteria besides ultimate investment performance? So I'm just curious kind of how that's manifesting itself and if you guys are seeing that happening.
Well, I can offer a perspective because we manage capital for blue states and red states. And there are definitely differences and preferences. I would say maybe the mainstay, though, is back to where Manny was and I was a minute ago. Everyone's still very focused on returns. You know, if you're a big state pension fund, you've got these enormous long-term liabilities. You need to earn 7% plus, okay, annual to just stay afloat and not further indebt the state with a burden. And so that is, in blue states and red states, I think continues to be the overarching issue. Now, that said, you know, different investors have, you know, some preferences now with wanting to invest in some, what I would call more sustainable materials, whether it's dynamic glass that reduces your energy consumption. I think everybody's focused on, you know, energy efficiency in their projects. That generally just makes good economic sense. But no one is really, you know, going to get willing to reduce their return requirements for that. But I am seeing some of the pension funds want to take advantage, for example, of the federal legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, which honestly is a total game changer for some of these new technologies, making the built environment greener. And, they'd love that because, it's basically half off. If I put a dynamic glass in a new project that we're building, the cost of adding it now is subsidized by the government. And so the pension funds, whether they're in blue states or red states, they love that. They're glad to do it now that it, with the subsidy, but no one has come to me and said, please build me the greenest project you can, and I'm willing to shave off 200 basis points from my return requirement. No one.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Manny or Carolyn, any thoughts on just the recent legislation and other stuff that's going on regarding ESG?
I'm from New York State Pension Fund, so kind of know where how the state leans. But with that said, it's we committed 20 billion to what we call sustainable investments and climate solutions, right? So these type of programs fit into that, and we're already past that mark, right? So now we're looking at, okay, how much more are we going to invest in these type of programs? But going back to that point where we're fiduciaries first, by law we can't be social investors. That's just by the mandate of the Constitution in New York. But with that said, just like any three of us here, there's evaluation criteria that we use for any investment, and one of the frameworks is the ESG, right? And a manager will be underwritten from that lens, and that's one component of the entire investment criteria that we use. And I'll be honest, like some score well and others don't, and we'll invest with the managers that don't do well, with the intent that they progress over time, and we meet with them on a proactive basis to ensure that they're getting there. But it really hasn't affected us, but it's a framework. It's just part of our evaluation. It's not a yay, it's not a yes or a no into doing the investment or not.
Gotcha. Well, listen, I appreciate that. I'm gonna jump into some questions that are coming in from the participants here, and we'll let you comment on those. So I have a question here from one. He says the venture capital community has started gaining traction in having emerging diverse managers raise capital from institutional investors. Why has it been so much more difficult from the real estate and hedge fund industry to have emerging diverse managers raise institutional money? So if any of you would like to comment on that, if you have a perspective.
I think Brian said it, clearly said it, right? There's not many of us, right, in the industry, right? And Ivan, you and I, PREA Foundation, right? We know what the numbers are, right? We know the people that look like us, they're not at those lower levels, right? Where they need to be, right? The numbers are staggering, right? As to where it is, and we're working on programs to help that, to get people in a lot earlier into the industry, so they look like us. It's been difficult, but that's why a lot of us have these programs. I want to say the biggest pension funds have these programs, right? Texas Teachers, ourselves, California, the CalSTRS, CalPERS, New York State Teachers. The biggest pension funds, right there in New York City, right? They all have the programs. It's probably just have to understand how to win. This is what I always tell the emerging managers: understand who you're trying to raise capital from, right? There is a plethora of information out there on the website. Unfortunately, if you go to our website, you just have to do a little digging, just to get it. But the information is all there, and make yourself knowledgeable, right? And then who our program partners are, who manages our money, right? And those are the people you target. And it's not easy, but it's not easy for the person who is not a minority either, right? It's just there's just certain criteria that you need to meet, and it takes a while. And I will say that we start, there is a particular person that we invested with over 10 years ago, and there were very small bite sizes and the checks, and today they've risen their second fund and we've invested directly in them. It just takes a little time, but over time, there'll be more and more of us, right, getting that out.
Ivan, can I offer something? Can I offer a
Okay.
quick perspective? Just a reality, in my opinion, on this is you have to have a real balance sheet to launch a company. And, not only do you have to like stand up a company and be able to hire people, but if I go raise, let's just say I raise $100 million venture with Manny's going to want me to put in what's called a co-investment, somewhere between 2 and 5%. And so I'm going to have to figure out how to come up with $2 to $5 million, either through my own savings or friends and what we call friends and family. And, look, most of us don't have friends and family that can just pump in $5 million to help us launch the business. And most of us don't have that capital. I graduated from Harvard Business School with a lot of debt. I couldn't have done this, right? So I think that's a practical reality. And it isn't to say that everyone who started this firm is a firm like ours is rich, but they probably have resources. They have either the resources to not generate a salary for a while and or the resources to, invest $5-10 million to get something launched. It takes a lot to get these things off the ground.
Well, especially, it sounds like it takes a lot to get these ventures off the ground because they're dealing at such high, such large amounts of capital and the projects are all enormous, right? It's not like me, like I said, going in and buying a fixer-upper in my local neighborhood I started doing fixer-uppers at like $50,000 in Dallas, Texas, 15 years ago. That's a doable project. And even some of these smaller communities or rural communities have projects that are in scale a lot smaller. To get to institutional capital levels, it really is all in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to even get anybody to look at these deals. Is that right?
That's right.
And just for context, let me add one more thing. The data from the Knight Foundation study on asset managers, I think they list venture capital as being about 9% minority, sort of with assets under management. Real estate is about 1%. So only 1% of firms are minority owned. Which is, again, a significant difference too. So the real estate industry, as Manny pointed out, is behind. This is why we exist. This is why you're all here. But we need a lot more emerging managers and diverse individuals in that industry that even understand some of the dynamics, of what's going on around the country with these communities. Let me ask a couple more questions here from the audience, and then you guys can comment. We have a comment about whether or not any of you do any work with smaller markets, rural communities, let's say areas with less than 50,000 population and below. Are there any investments that are going to those areas that you are familiar with or involved with for smaller communities?
That's just really tough for us, right? It's about exit, right? Liquidity, you don't find that, in very rural areas.
Yeah, and it's hard to find scale. I mean, if Manny, you need to invest $50 million, $100 million at a time, go into a small town, you could buy the whole town for that, and you don't want that exposure. Like my parents ask me all the time, they say, you're this big shot at this company. Why don't you come invest in New Mexico, your home state? And I say, because I can't, I can't really place the capital that easily, and then I can't be certain that the capital markets are going to reward me on exit. If I want to buy an apartment building for 50 million, will there be a deep enough capital pool to buy me out at 75 million in 5 years when I need to harvest? It's just harder in these smaller communities. And so I think most of, smaller communities rely on private, more local capital to fund it, as opposed to the institutional capital that's represented here.
Yeah, that's a great comment. We're getting close to the end here. Let's see. Let me close with this because we're getting to time here and I don't want to go too long here. The last thing I'll say is if you have any advice for the folks on this call that are in these communities, that are looking for what type of projects may rise to the level that would be interesting and important. Carolyn, you mentioned affordable housing. projects as maybe being an area that has interest, that has some interesting parallels. There may be others. Brian, you mentioned earlier as well that if you could find, developers that are minority owned, because they would have access to maybe deals or interesting opportunities that would be there. Where's that access point where people here can start thinking about how do we bring a coalition or stand up projects that might even have a chance to getting or growing to those levels? Any last closing thoughts are where people can begin to think about how they can start making inroads into institutional capital?
I'll start. One of the things that our impact sector is doing is sort of turning things on its head a little bit. So rather than going sort of targeting deal by deal, we're looking at specific markets where we can go and partner with the local municipalities, get access to the government representatives that actually have the power to drive the types of incentives required to allow us to then invest in those communities and generate the types of returns that we need to make. So I think that one of the things that you can do is just pay close attention to who your local representatives are and what their agendas are and what types of projects they're supporting and what types of investments they're supporting locally, and which firms they're doing it with, because not all firms are created equal when it comes to community investment. Historically, there's actually a lot of money being pumped into the impact sector right now, a lot of interest just based on the demand, especially for affordable housing, because there is such a dearth of affordable housing in our country. So the demand is clearly there, and I think that enough managers have proven that you can make returns if you do it well. However, historically, there have been plenty of managers that have invested in affordable housing without the intentionality to maintain it as affordable. And so now that's changing, and you're seeing a lot more firms with the right sort of intention, building a business plan that can still maintain the project affordable and actually sort of build other community services around it. And it's more of a community building effort rather than just a pure play sort of buy affordable and then sell and turn into market rate later to make a return type of thing, which is not what you want. So I think just paying close attention to who your representatives are, what their agendas are, what firms are actually partnering with, what kind of incentives they're putting out there in order to generate that type of investment that you want to see in your communities.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. Manny or Brian, any last comments or thoughts on the topic?
I'll offer one thought, and I'm not an expert in this, okay? This is sort of beyond my realm of expertise, but let me just assume, you're in, let's say, some city in Texas or some city in California. I think that to the extent you're, in community leadership and looking to catalyze growth or enhance your community, I think it doesn't hurt for you or your colleagues to be in touch with some of the people at the state pension funds, because there may be some projects that, pencil, that make economic sense and enable the pension fund to, meet their fiduciary responsibilities, which are paramount, but also catalyze growth in their home state. And, I think that varies by pension fund. I think there are very severe limitations on what can and can't be done there. But, look, these are public entities at the end of the day. And, I know that, I think about my mother is under the New Mexico Educator Pension Fund, and you'd like their savings to be helping to grow the New Mexico economy. and why not? But I think that can come from some of the community leaders. Just know that there's constraints that the pension fund managers are going to have. And Manny would know more about this than I do, and he's probably on the receiving end of this in New York in a way that I am not.
Manny, any last words? And then I'm going to close this out. I'm muted.
Sorry. There's one place to focus. We see where you get a lot of smaller shops, minority shops, are the PPPs, right? The public-private partnerships, right? These deals tend to be very large that, they need to attract a lot of capital, and you see a lot of, smaller firms, minority firms. Granted, you may not be in control, but you get an opportunity to build your track record, right? And that's what it comes down to, right? When we're evaluating, and potentially you grow out of that, and you do deals that you're in control. But that's one way, right? Knowing who has that project, right? And that's all, published, right? It's like who has control of those projects, and start those the communication with those.
That's great. People. Listen, I appreciate you all being here. This is a great topic to begin learning about. All of us are learning and figuring out how to understand this world better. So I appreciate you bringing your expertise and talents on this. And thank you for the work you do. I know you're representing our community well, in your different institutions and in the industry. And with that, I'll just pass it back to the ambassador to close us out.
Great. Thank you so very much. And on behalf of the Aspen Institute Latinos in Society program, I would like to thank Dr. Ivan Barron for designing and moderating this great session on institutional capital. And I want to thank our speakers, Manuel Casanga, Carolyn Inoa Monge, and Brian Sanchez, for sharing your insights with our audience. And on a personal level, I just want to say that it inspires me and encourages me to hear the voices of Latinos articulating on such important issues of our time, both to our community and a broader audience. Thank you to also everyone who tuned in. We hope that this information gave you an understanding of how capital is invested in your communities, our communities, and will give you the tools to advocate for more inclusive investments. As I mentioned earlier, we we'll make the recording of this webinar available next week, so you can rewatch it or share it with your networks. And you will also receive a link to a survey in our post-webinar email. Your feedback is so important to us to help us improve our programming. So we hope you will share your thoughts with us through the survey. And we want to thank you again very, very much on behalf of the Aspen Institute Latinos in Society program. Thank you for your time, and please keep an eye out for the next session in our masterclass series. Have a great day.